RoseAnne, great to have you with us. As I mentioned, you just wrapped up a term as the Ontario Regional Chief. Why have you decided to run for National Chief?
Well, as you know, Dennis, I'm a third-generation chief, and when I decided not to run for Regional Chief, I went into ceremony to get to that decision. And I also went into ceremony to look at the path forward. And this is actually the answer that I received. And so coming from a leadership family, it's important for me to continue on that journey and to continue to serve First Nations. And this is just the next evolution for me.
What would be some of your priorities should you become elected?
Well, I do have a number of platform items. And for me, a big part of the reason I'm running is because I do see that the AFN does need to have real and evolutionary change. At the same time, there are some really great things that the AFN is doing, and I want to acknowledge those things. What I've seen as an AFN executive member is the need to really separate the political and administrative arms of the AFN. The corporate and political interests of the AFN have to be properly delineated in order to have a stronger organization. And I see that as some of the immediate work that needs to be done. But my whole platform is built upon the idea that we need a consensus-based agenda for action nationally. And how do we do that? Well, we listen to communities. We make sure that when it comes to First Nations inherent and treaty rights, that process is community-based and that it's community-driven. And those community processes feed into regional approaches, which is where I previously was as a regional chief. And then those regional approaches together form a national response. And that is based upon consensus, not outvoting each other and not politicking in the traditional sense, but really trying to figure out how do we work together nationally? How do we build consensus? How do we build unity? And to me, that's one of the cornerstones of my platform. And of course, you know, when I talk about inherent and treaty rights, that is something we all share across Canada. And we have different kinds of treaties, though. We have pre-Confederation, post-Confederation, numbered treaties, modern treaties. These rights at the very ground level are the rights that we all share. At the same time, there's this way that we have to figure out the path forward while respecting the various approaches that exist across Canada and trying to minimally impact each other's rights as we move forward to assert our rights, to assert our sovereignty. And at the same time, you know, we're in a colonial system right now, and we do have sovereignty. And what we have to start to move toward is this creating more space for First Nation sovereignty, for First Nation rights, for our inherent and treaty rights, and the actual international nature of our agreements with Canada.
You know, RoseAnne, running for National Chief typically involves visiting a lot of communities to garner support, something that's clearly not going to be happening this time around with the pandemic and everything's kind of being done virtually. Has that made it difficult to hear from the people themselves, or are you still hearing from people, and what are they telling you?
It is definitely more challenging to be totally online. At the same time, I have been holding weekly meetings myself with the chiefs in Ontario, and that's because we've had a very strong and effective response to the pandemic, and a lot of that was done online. So it is possible to do the work online, and I believe that that for me has been helpful as I've entered the race, because I'm very used to online platforms and how to communicate and have interactions, despite the fact that, you know, we're so far apart from each other, and sometimes we're just like sitting in our dining room or our living room. And we want to connect still, and I think it's still possible to do that. I certainly would prefer to have been able to go to communities and visit people and see some of the conditions and some of the issues and you know, some of the struggles that First Nations are going through, and to be able to say that as National Chief, I'll be right beside them. You know, Dennis, you might know I was very much an activist chief when I was a chief. I blocked highways. I, participated in every kind of action in order to defend our rights and to protect our rights. And that to me is something that is difficult to do in this kind of environment. But I want First Nations to know that I'll be standing beside them, behind them, and working with them in their struggles, because the road ahead is still long for First Nations. I mean, look at what's just happened recently with the discovery of the 215 little children in Kamloops. And now, as weeks go on, we're finding more and more of these graves are being discovered. And this is a very difficult time for our people. And certainly, a part of what we would normally do is to go to a community and support them and hug them and pray with them. And what we can do, we're trying to do that online, which certainly is difficult to do, but at the same time, maybe the online presence is why we know so much about what's happening across Canada as well.
RoseAnne, we'll have to leave it there, but really do appreciate you taking some time for us here today, and good luck.
Thank you, Dennis.